The autumn rain drummed against the windows of their brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, creating rivulets that distorted the glowing streetlights below. Sarah Chen Morrison stood at the kitchen island, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. The knife sliced through carrots with rhythmic precision, a meditation she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. "Mom, can you help me with my calculus homework?" Emma's voice drifted from the dining room, where their 17-year-old daughter had spread her textbooks across the mahogany table. "Give me 5 minutes, sweetheart. Your father will be home soon." Sarah's voice remained steady, a practiced calm that masked the storm brewing beneath. The front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool October air and the familiar sound of David's footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his charcoal suit still crisp despite the 12-hour day at Morrison & Associates, the law firm he'd built from nothing into one of Manhattan's most prestigious corporate practices. "Smells amazing," he said, loosening his tie. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, a detail Sarah had been noticing more frequently over the past months. "Coq au vin?" she replied, not turning from the stove. "Your mother's recipe." David moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. The gesture that once brought comfort now felt heavy, weighted with unspoken words. "You've been crying." Sarah stiffened. She'd been careful to repair her makeup, to hide the evidence of her afternoon breakdown. "Just the onions. We're having coq au vin, not French onion soup." His hands dropped away. "Sarah, we need to talk. After dinner." She moved to the oven, checking the Dutch oven where the chicken simmered in wine and herbs. "Emma needs help with her homework, and Jake has his college interview prep at 8. Jake's interview prep was moved to tomorrow. He texted me." David's voice carried that lawyer's precision that had won him countless cases, but now felt like cross-examination in their own home. "He's at Tyler's house working on their history project." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Their 19-year-old son, home from Columbia for fall break, had become adept at avoiding family dinners lately. She couldn't blame him. The tension in the house had become a living thing, coiling around every conversation. "Then it'll just be the three of us," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. "Emma, come set the table, please." Their daughter appeared, her long black hair pulled back in the same style Sarah had worn at her age. The resemblance was striking, the same delicate features, the same determined set to her jaw. But Emma had David's eyes, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. "Dad, you look tired," Emma observed, pulling plates from the cabinet. "Long day. The Hartman acquisition is proving more complex than anticipated." David poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the sidebar. "Your mother and I might need to postpone our anniversary trip to Paris." Sarah's hand stilled on the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the sauce. Their 20th anniversary was in 3 weeks. She'd been clinging to that trip like a life raft, hoping that returning to the city where they'd honeymooned might rekindle something that had been slowly dying. "That's okay," Emma said, though disappointment flickered across her face. "You guys have been talking about that trip for months." "Work comes first," David said, the words automatic. "The firm is at a critical juncture. We're looking at a potential merger that could triple our international presence." Sarah ladled the coq au vin onto plates, her movements mechanical. She'd heard variations of this speech for 2 decades. First it had been about building the firm, then about establishing their reputation, now about expansion. Always about tomorrow, never about today. They sat at the dining table, the rain creating a percussion backdrop to the clink of silverware against china. Sarah watched David cut his chicken with surgical precision, his mind clearly elsewhere. Emma filled the silence with chatter about her upcoming SATs and her role in the school's production of The Crucible. "I'm playing Abigail Williams," Emma announced proudly. "Ms. Patterson says I have a natural intensity for the role." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah said, genuinely smiling for the first time that evening. "When's the performance?" 3 weeks. November 15th through 17th. Emma turned to her father. "You'll come, right, Dad?" David hesitated, pulling out his phone to check his calendar. "The 15th, that's the Chicago conference, but I'll try to make it back for Saturday's show." "You said that about my spring concert," Emma's voice dropped, "and my debate championship." "Emma," Sarah intervened gently, recognizing the hurt beneath her daughter's accusation. "Your father always has something more important," Emma finished, standing abruptly. "May I be excused? I really do need help with that calculus." Sarah nodded, watching her daughter retreat upstairs. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, laden with years of accumulated disappointments. "She's being dramatic," David said finally, refilling his scotch. "She's being 17, and she's not wrong." Sarah began clearing the barely touched plates. "When was the last time you attended one of her events? Or one of Jake's games?" "I provide for this family." David's voice hardened. "This house, their education, the lifestyle you've all become accustomed to. None of it comes free. I know that. Sarah turned on the kitchen faucet, letting the hot water run over the dishes. I've always known that. David appeared beside her, taking a dish towel. For a moment, they fell into their old rhythm. She washing, he drying. It was one of the few domestic tasks he'd ever participated in, a holdover from their early days in that tiny apartment on the Lower East Side when they couldn't afford a dishwasher. Do you remember our first apartment? Sarah asked softly. That studio with the radiator that clanged all night? And the neighbor who played saxophone at 3 a.m., David added, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. You used to make up lyrics to his songs. Ode to Insomnia in B-flat, Sarah laughed, the sound surprising them both. We were so broke. Oh, do you remember the week we lived on ramen and dreams? You made it seem like an adventure. David's voice grew distant. You made everything seem possible then. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah turned off the water, drying her hands slowly. What happened to us, David? He set down the plate he'd been drying, his jaw tightening. Life happened. Reality happened. I built something real. Something lasting. At what cost? Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't diminish what I've accomplished. What we've accomplished. I'm not diminishing anything. I'm just asking when it became enough. When do we get to stop climbing and just be? David moved away from her, returning to his scotch. That's not how it works, Sarah. You can't just stop. The moment you stop pushing forward, you start sliding backward. Is that what you think we're doing? Sliding backward? He didn't answer immediately, staring out the rain-streaked window. The man she'd fallen in love with 22 years ago had been hungry, yes, but also hopeful. He'd talked about building a life, not just a career. When had that changed? When had the means become the end? I think, he said finally, that you've given all you could, and I'm grateful. But maybe it's time to accept that this is what our life is. This is what success looks like. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Given all I could? Your sacrifices haven't gone unnoticed. Leaving your career at the gallery to raise the kids, managing the household, being the perfect corporate wife at all those endless dinners and fundraisers. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You've been everything I needed you to be. Needed, Sarah repeated, the past tense not lost on her. And now? Now the kids are grown. Emma will be in college next year. You could go back to the art world if you wanted. Or volunteer work. Margaret Hartman runs that literacy foundation. Margaret Hartman, whose husband you're currently destroying in that acquisition. David's face darkened. Business is business. You've never understood that. I understood it when you crushed Robert's firm last year. He was your mentor, David. He gave you your first job. And I surpassed him. That's how it works. David drained his scotch. The weak get absorbed by the strong. Natural selection in three-piece suits. Sarah studied the man she'd married, searching for traces of the idealistic law student who'd wanted to change the world. That David had read her poetry on the roof of their building, had spent hours in galleries listening to her explain why a particular brushstroke moved her to tears. When had he stopped seeing beauty as essential rather than ornamental? Is that what I am now? She asked quietly. The weak, don't be melodramatic. But something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition. You're my wife, but not your partner. Not anymore. David set down his glass with careful precision. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I'll be staying at the office tonight. It wasn't unusual. The firm kept a corporate apartment for late nights and early mornings, but tonight it felt like more than convenience. It felt like retreat. David. She called him back as he reached the kitchen doorway. What if I haven't given all I could? What if there's more? He paused but didn't turn around. More what, Sarah? More dinner parties? More charity committees? More pretending that this life is enough for you? The accusation stung because it held truth. She had been pretending, but not in the way he thought. She'd been pretending that love could survive on scraps of attention, that marriage could endure on the fumes of what they'd once been. She'd been pretending that the distance between them was merely physical, not the vast emotional chasm it had become. Good night, David. He left without another word. Sarah heard him climb the stairs, his footsteps pausing outside Emma's room. Their daughter's voice drifted down, explaining a calculus problem by the sound of it. At least David could still connect with the children, even if those connections were becoming increasingly transactional, help with homework, checks for college, advice on careers. Sarah returned to the kitchen, mechanically finishing the dishes. The coq au vin pot soaked in the sink, the sauce forming a burgundy film on the water's surface. She'd made the dish at least 50 times over the years, perfecting David's mother's recipe until even that formidable woman had admitted Sarah's version was superior. Such a small victory, but she'd treasured it once. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Jake. Staying at Tyler's tonight. Tell Dad I'll be ready for interview prep tomorrow. Another empty chair at breakfast. Sarah wondered when family meals had become something to avoid rather than anticipate. She remembered Jake as a toddler, refusing to eat unless she made airplane noises with his spoon. Emma in her high chair, covered in mashed sweet potatoes, laughing at her brother's antics. David sneaking bites of their food, making them giggle with his exaggerated theft. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Sarah poured herself a glass of the cooking wine, a good burgundy because David insisted on quality even for cooking, and wandered into his study. The room smelled of leather and his cologne, shelves lined with legal volumes and the awards that testified to his success. The New York State Bar Association's Award of Excellence, the American College of Trial Lawyers Medallion, photos with senators, CEOs, even a Supreme Court justice. But tucked behind a row of books, almost hidden, she found what she was looking for. Their wedding album, dusty with neglect. She pulled it out. Settling into his leather chair with her wine, the young couple in the photos seemed like strangers. David, thin and eager, his rented tux slightly too large. Sarah, radiant in her mother's altered wedding dress, her smile so broad it looked almost painful. They'd been married at City Hall, unable to afford anything grander, but in the photos they looked like royalty, rich in everything but money. You've already given all you could. The words echoed in the empty room. Is that what he truly believed? That she was spent, used up, nothing left to offer? Or was it what he needed to believe to justify whatever came next? Sarah closed the album, returning it to its hiding place. In the kitchen, she retrieved her laptop from the charging station and opened a password-protected folder she'd created 6 months ago. Inside were bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, all the financial documents she'd started gathering when the distance between them had begun to feel permanent rather than temporary. But there was another folder, one marked simply Gallery. Inside were correspondence with her old colleagues, proposals for exhibitions, even a tentative offer to curate a contemporary Asian artist's showcase at her former gallery. She'd turned it down, of course. David had needed her to host the partnership dinner that week. Sarah stared at the screen, at the life she'd put on hold 2 decades ago. She'd been a rising star in the art world then, her eye for emerging talent respected, her essays on contemporary art published in prestigious journals. But David's career had demanded a full-time support system, and she'd convinced herself it was temporary. Just until he made partner. Just until the firm was established. Just until. Her phone rang, startling her. Emma's name appeared on the screen. Mom, can you come up? I'm stuck on this problem, and Dad left. On my way, sweetheart. Sarah closed the laptop, leaving her wine unfinished. As she climbed the stairs to her daughter's room, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. 45 years old, still attractive in the carefully maintained way of Upper East Side wives. But there was something else in her reflection tonight, a glimmer of the woman she'd been before she'd become Mrs. David Morrison. What if there's more? She'd asked him. Helping Emma with her calculus, explaining derivatives and rates of change, Sarah felt a strange parallel to her own life. Everything was about transformation, about finding what lay beneath the surface function. What was her own derivative? She wondered. What would be revealed if she stopped being just a variable in someone else's equation? After Emma finally understood the problem and headed to bed, Sarah stood in the hallway between her children's rooms. Jake's room sat empty, but his presence lingered. Soccer trophies, band posters, the acceptance letter from Columbia still pinned to his bulletin board. Emma's light went out, leaving only the nightlight she still used, casting stars across her ceiling. Sarah made her way to the master bedroom, the California king bed stretching empty and vast. David's pillow remained perfectly fluffed, untouched. She sat on his side of the bed, running her hand over the cool sheets. How many nights had she fallen asleep here alone, telling herself he was building their future? The rain had softened to a gentle patter. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at their tree-lined street. Other brownstones stood like sentinels, each hiding its own secrets behind elegant facades. How many other marriages were held together by habit and mortgages rather than love? How many other women stood at their windows at night, wondering when they'd become supporting characters in their own lives? Her phone buzzed. A text from David. Early deposition tomorrow. We'll grab breakfast at the office. Don't wait up. She wasn't waiting. Not anymore. Sarah opened her jewelry box, pushing aside the tennis bracelet and pearl necklaces to find a small key taped to the bottom. It opened a safety deposit box at a bank David didn't know about, where she'd been slowly accumulating her own resources. Not much. Some cash, her grandmother's jewelry, documents he didn't know existed, her just-in-case fund, though she'd never admitted to herself what case she was preparing for. Looking at that key, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow, she would call the gallery. She would say yes to the exhibition. It was a small step, but it was forward motion. Her own derivative, her own rate of change. "You've already given all you could," David had said. He was wrong. She'd given what was asked, what was expected, what was needed to build his empire. But there were parts of herself she'd held in reserve, protected and preserved like artwork in climate-controlled storage. Dreams deferred weren't always dreams denied. The rain stopped entirely, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. Sarah prepared for bed methodically, each action feeling weighted with significance. Tomorrow would look the same on the surface. Breakfast for Emma, managing the household, perhaps a charity lunch with the other partners' wives. But underneath, everything would be different. She would be different. As she turned out the light, Sarah whispered to the empty room, "You have no idea what I still have." The darkness didn't answer. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like possibility. Outside, Brooklyn slowly quieted, the city that never sleeps allowing itself a few hours of rest. But Sarah lay awake, planning. Not the next dinner party or fundraiser, but her own quiet revolution. One that would begin tomorrow with a single phone call, a single yes to the life she'd put on pause. David thought he knew her limits, thought he'd cataloged her contributions like items on a balance sheet, but he'd made the fatal error of any overconfident lawyer. He'd assumed facts, not an evidence. He'd assumed that the woman who'd supported his ascent had no ambitions of her own left to pursue. He would learn otherwise. They all would. The clock on the nightstand glowed. 2:17 a.m. In 5 hours, Emma would need breakfast. In 6 hours, David would be at his office, constructing another victory. But right now, in this suspended moment between today and tomorrow, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where she wasn't just the woman behind the successful man, but a force in her own right. She'd given all she could to his dreams. Now it was time to reclaim her own. End of Chapter 1. Tentar novamente gokeditor, Chapter 2. The Unveiling. The call came at 9:47 a.m., just as Sarah was returning from dropping Emma at school. She'd been sitting in her car outside the Reinberg Gallery, working up the courage to go inside, when her phone rang. David's office number. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Patricia, Mr. Morrison's assistant. He asked me to remind you about the Hartman dinner tonight, 7:30 at Le Bernardin." Sarah gripped the steering wheel. She'd deliberately forgotten about the dinner. Another evening of pretending their marriage was solid, while David eviscerated someone else's life's work. "I'll be there. He also wanted me to confirm you'll be wearing the black Versace. Mr. Hartman's wife apparently has a thing about being outdressed." The black Versace. The dress David had chosen for her to wear when they needed to project power. Sarah had once loved how he noticed what she wore, thinking it romantic. Now she recognized it as another form of control, packaging her like a product for display. "Actually, Patricia, I'll be wearing something else tonight." A pause. Patricia had been with David for 8 years, longer than most associates lasted. She knew the rhythms of the Morrison marriage better than Sarah liked to admit. "Should I inform Mr. Morrison?" "No need. I'll see him tonight." Sarah ended the call and stepped out of her car. The Reinberg Gallery stood before her, its minimalist facade unchanged from when she'd last worked there. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the current exhibition, massive abstract canvases that seemed to pulse with color and movement. "Sarah? Sarah Chen?" She turned to find Marcus Reinberg himself emerging from a town car, his silver hair longer now but his eyes still sharp behind designer glasses. He'd given her her first job out of Columbia, had been the first to see her potential. "It's Morrison now," she said, then wondered why she'd felt the need to clarify. "Hello, Marcus. My God, it's really you." He kissed her cheeks in the European style he'd affected decades ago. "When I heard you might be interested in the Asian Contemporary Showcase, I thought someone was playing a joke." Sarah Chen, the prodigy who vanished into matrimony. Not vanished. Redirected. His assessment was as penetrating as she remembered. "Come, let me show you what you've missed while you were being redirected." The gallery smelled exactly as she remembered. That particular mixture of fresh paint, expensive perfume, and possibility. Marcus led her through the main space, past installations that made her fingers itch to write about them, to analyze their cultural dialogue and artistic lineage. "This is Yuki Mori's work." Marcus gestured to a series of photographs that seemed to fragment and reconstruct the Tokyo skyline. "She's exactly the kind of artist you would have discovered. 26, completely unknown outside Japan until last year. Now MoMA's sniffing around." Sarah studied the photographs, her mind automatically composing the exhibition notes. She's deconstructing urban identity. The fragmentation isn't about the city, it's about the self within the city. There she is. Marcus smiled. I was wondering if Sarah Chen was still in there somewhere. They settled in his office, unchanged except for new artwork on the walls. Marcus poured green tea from a cast-iron pot. He'd always insisted proper tea was essential for proper thinking. The showcase would be significant, he began without preamble. 20 artists, 6 weeks, major press. The Museum of Contemporary Art wants to partner. But I need a curator who understands both the Eastern and Western gaze, someone who can navigate the cultural translations without losing authenticity. You need someone who hasn't been out of the game for 20 years. I need you. Marcus leaned forward. Do you know how many exhibitions I've mounted since you left? Hundreds. Do you know how many curators I've worked with? Dozens. None of them had your eye. Your ability to see not just what the artist created, but what they're trying to become. Sarah sipped her tea, letting the familiar ritual calm her racing thoughts. David doesn't know I'm here. Ah. Marcus sat back. The infamous David Morrison. I've seen his name in the papers. Quite the success story. Yes. And you? Have you been a success story too? The question hung between them. Had she been successful? By Upper East Side standards, certainly. She'd raised 2 accomplished children, run a household that operated with military precision, hosted dinners that had facilitated million-dollar deals. But by her own standards? I've been a good wife, she said finally. That wasn't what I asked. Her phone buzzed. Emma, texting from school. Forgot my Crucible script. Can you bring? I need to think about it, Sarah said, already standing. Your daughter needs her mother to be whole. Marcus's voice gentled. I've known you since you were 22, Sarah. You used to vibrate with ambition, with vision. Don't tell me that all disappeared because you fell in love. It didn't disappear. It waited. Waiting is just another word for dying slowly. Sarah left with Marcus's proposal in her bag and his words echoing in her head. She stopped at home to grab Emma's script, then spent the rest of the morning in motion. Dry cleaning, grocery shopping, the mindless errands that filled days and produced nothing lasting. But her mind kept returning to those photographs, to the way Yuki Mori had captured dissolution and reformation in a single frame. At Whole Foods, she ran into Margaret Hartman by the organic vegetables. The woman whose husband David was currently destroying smiled with practiced warmth, her Botox preventing any genuine expression. Sarah, darling, I hear we're dining together tonight. Yes. Sarah selected heirloom tomatoes with unnecessary care. Looking forward to it? Margaret's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. No need to pretend, dear. We both know what these dinners are. Public executions with a wine pairing. She lowered her voice. Richard's been preparing for weeks. He thinks he can convince David to back off if he just finds the right approach. I'm sorry, Sarah said, meaning it. Don't be. It's business, as they say. Margaret's smile turned brittle. Though I do wonder sometimes what would happen if we stopped enabling them. If we refused to smile while they carved up each other's dreams over the fish course. What would happen? I suppose they'd have to face each other without us as buffers. Might get messy. Margaret touched Sarah's arm. Wear something stunning tonight. If we must attend the execution, we might as well look fabulous. Sarah delivered Emma's script to the school's front office, then found herself driving aimlessly through the city. She passed the building where she and David had lived in that first studio apartment. It had been gentrified now, a Starbucks occupying the ground floor where the bodega used to be. Everything changed. Everything except her life, which had crystallized around David's success like an insect in amber. Her phone rang. Jake. Hey, Mom. Dad texted about interview prep. Is it okay if I skip? Tyler and I have this project. It's not okay. Sarah surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Your father cleared his schedule for you. He clears his schedule for acquisitions, Mom. I'm just another item on his calendar. Jake, it's fine. I'll be there. But can you do me a favor? Can you remind him that I'm pre-med, not pre-law? I know he has this whole succession plan mapped out, but I actually want to help people, not destroy them. The bitterness in her son's voice cut deep. When had Jake developed this anger toward his father? Or had it always been there, hidden beneath the performance of the dutiful son? He doesn't destroy people, Sarah said automatically, then wondered why she was defending David. He's building something. Yeah? What happens when he's done building? What happens to all of us when there's nothing left to acquire? Jake hung up before she could answer. Sarah pulled over, suddenly exhausted. Her children saw it too then, the hollowness at the center of their carefully constructed life. She drove home and stood in her walk-in closet, staring at the black Versace. It hung there like armor, designed to project power and invulnerability. She pushed it aside and reached deeper into the closet, finding a dress she hadn't worn in years. Crimson silk, purchased on a whim during a gallery opening in Soho before Emma was born. It had seemed too bold for the corporate wife she'd become, too much like the woman she'd been. Tonight, it seemed perfect. Sarah spent the afternoon preparing, not just physically, but mentally. She reviewed Marcus's proposal, made notes on potential artists, even reached out to old contacts who responded with surprise and enthusiasm. With each email, each conversation, she felt layers of dormancy falling away. By the time David's driver arrived at 7, Sarah had transformed. The crimson dress moved like liquid fire, her grandmother's ruby earrings catching the light. She'd styled her hair differently, less contained, more like the art student who used to argue passionately about Basquiat until dawn. David was already at the restaurant when she arrived, seated at their usual corner table with the Hartmans. He looked up as she approached, and she saw him register the dress, the hair, the indefinable something that had changed. His eyes narrowed slightly, a lawyer noting an unexpected variable. "Sarah." He stood, kissing her cheek perfunctorily. "You look different." "You look exactly the same," she replied, which wasn't a compliment. Richard Hartman rose to greet her, and Sarah saw Margaret had been right. The man was already defeated, his handshake limp with predetermined loss. Margaret, resplendent in emerald green, raised her martini in a mock toast. "Sarah, you're absolutely glowing. Have you done something new? Something old?" "Actually, rediscovered." David ordered for the table without consulting anyone, his usual power play. Sarah let him, sipping her wine and studying the man she'd married. He launched into business talk immediately, discussing market projections and acquisition strategies while their appetizers arrived. "The key," David explained to Richard, who wasn't really listening, "is to identify weakness before it's apparent. By the time vulnerability is visible, it's too late to maximize advantage." "Fascinating," Sarah interjected. "Is that how you identified me? Saw my weakness before I did?" The table went silent. David's fork paused midway to his mouth. "I'm not sure what you mean. Just wondering about your methodology. You convinced me to leave the gallery right when Marcus was about to promote me to senior curator. Was that identifying weakness or creating it?" Margaret coughed delicately into her napkin, clearly delighted. Richard looked confused, sensing undercurrents he couldn't navigate. "This isn't the time, Sarah." David's voice carried a warning. "When is the time? Next year? Next decade?" Sarah turned to Richard. "Did you know David studied your company for 3 years before making his move? 3 years of dinner parties and golf games pretending to be your friend while documenting every vulnerability." "Sarah," David's jaw tightened. "Enough. You're right. It is enough." She placed her napkin on the table. "I had coffee with Marcus Reinberg today. He's offered me the curator position for a major exhibition." I said yes. David's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, anger, calculation. Always calculation. "We should discuss this at home. We should have discussed it 20 years ago. But you were building something, remember? And I was giving all I could." She stood, the crimson dress catching the light. "Enjoy your dinner. I'm sure Richard's corporate corpse will pair beautifully with the wine." Sarah walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She heard David call her name, but didn't turn back. Outside, the October evening was crisp and clear. She hailed a cab instead of calling David's driver. "Where to?" the cabbie asked. "The Reinberg Gallery," she said. "No, actually, Brooklyn Bridge Park." The park was nearly empty, the bridge lit up against the night sky. Sarah found a bench and sat, not caring about the expensive dress. Her phone buzzed incessantly, David calling, texting, the fury evident even in his typed words. She turned it off. A jogger passed, then a couple walking a dog. Normal people living normal lives, not performing elaborate dinners over someone else's destruction. When had she accepted that as normal? When had she agreed to be a prop in David's acquisitive theater? "You've already given all you could." The words had been meant to dismiss her, to categorize her as spent. But sitting there, watching the city lights dance on the water, Sarah realized he'd actually freed her. If she'd given all she could to his life, she owed nothing more. The debt was paid. She could start giving to herself. Her phone, even powered off, felt heavy in her purse. Tomorrow there would be consequences. David would rage, manipulate, possibly threaten. He'd use the children, the finances, whatever leverage he could find. That was his nature. To acquire, to control, to win. But tonight, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Her own power. Not the reflected power of being Mrs. David Morrison, but the raw potential of being Sarah Chen. The woman who could see beauty where others saw chaos, who could identify brilliance before it blazed. A text from Emma broke through when she turned her phone back on. Dad came home pissed. What happened? Are you okay? Sarah smiled, typing back, I'm better than okay. Home soon. Another text. This one from Jake. Dad's in his study breaking things. Mom, what did you do? Also, it's awesome. And unexpectedly, one from Margaret Hartman. That was the most beautiful exit I've ever witnessed. Richard actually grew a spine after you left and told David the deal was off. Drinks soon? Sarah stood, brushing off her dress. The city sprawled before her, infinite with possibility. She'd spent 2 decades in a supporting role, making someone else's ambitions possible. Now it was her turn to be the protagonist. The cab ride home felt like returning from another country. The brownstone looked the same, but everything had shifted. She could hear David in his study, his voice raised on a call. Damage control, probably. Emma met her at the door, eyes wide. Mom, you look beautiful. And Dad is... Your father is processing. How was rehearsal? Good, but... Mom, what happened? He mentioned something about you taking a job. Sarah hugged her daughter, breathing in her shampoo and youth. I'm going back to what I love. It might mean some changes. Changes like what? I don't know yet. But Emma, I need you to understand something. I haven't been fully myself for a long time. That's not your fault, or Jake's, or even your father's. It was my choice. But I'm making a different choice now. Emma pulled back, studying her with those sharp eyes. Are you and Dad getting divorced? I don't know, Sarah answered honestly. But whatever happens, you and Jake will be okay. Better than okay. David appeared in the doorway of his study, his tie loosened, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. Emma, go to your room. Dad, now. Emma squeezed Sarah's hand before retreating upstairs. David waited until her door closed before advancing. What the hell was that? His voice was low, controlled. His courtroom voice. You humiliated me in front of a client. I told the truth. You sabotaged a multi-million-dollar deal. I set Richard Hartman free. You should thank me. David laughed, harsh and disbelieving. Thank you? Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The same thing you've cost me. Opportunity. Don't be dramatic. You want to play at being a curator again? Fine. We could have discussed it like adults. When? Between depositions? During your victory dinners? Sarah moved past him toward the stairs. I'm done waiting for permission to live my own life. He grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to stop her. You're my wife. I'm a person. She looked down at his hand until he released her. I'm a person with ambitions and talents and dreams that have nothing to do with being your accessory. I never asked you to be an accessory. No, you just scheduled your life so there was no room for me to be anything else. David's face contorted. Everything I've done has been for this family. Everything you've done has been for David Morrison, Esquire. The family was just set dressing. She climbed the stairs, feeling his stare burning into her back. In their bedroom, her bedroom now, she decided, Sarah carefully hung up the crimson dress. It had served its purpose, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Her laptop waited on the dresser. She opened it and began typing a response to Marcus, accepting formally, outlining her vision for the exhibition. With each word, she felt more solid, more real. This was who she was. Someone who could see connections others missed, who could weave narratives from disparate artistic voices. A soft knock interrupted her. Jake stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. So you finally did it, he said. Did what? Woke up. He entered, sitting on the edge of the bed like he used to as a child. I've been waiting for you to remember who you were before Dad convinced you to disappear. I didn't disappear. Mom, you went from being this vibrant, passionate person to, I don't know, the world's most efficient household manager. Do you know I used to Google you? Found your old articles, your exhibition reviews. You were brilliant. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Are. You are brilliant. Dad just needed you to be small so he could feel big. The insight from her 19-year-old son was devastating in its accuracy. When did you get so wise? Therapy. Lots of therapy. Jake grinned. Turns out growing up in a household where success matters more than happiness creates some issues. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be yourself. Show Emma it's possible to choose your own path. Show me it's not too late to change course. After Jake left, Sarah continued working on her proposal until the early hours. She could hear David moving around downstairs, the clink of glass, the murmur of late-night calls to associates. Let him strategize. Let him plan his counterattack. She had her own battles to fight now. As dawn approached, Sarah finally closed her laptop. The exhibition would be her resurrection, not just professionally, but personally. She would show the art world what they'd missed during her absence. More importantly, she would show herself what she was still capable of. David had been wrong. She hadn't given all she could. She'd given what was asked, what was expected, what was required. But there were depths to her he'd never bothered to explore, strengths he'd never needed to see. Now he would see. They all would. The morning sun painted the bedroom walls gold. Sarah stood at the window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, artists were creating, dreamers were planning, people were choosing courage over comfort. Today, she would join them.